Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Patch and Crash, the podcast where gaming culture and life collide. Today's topic is going to be about how to get into the gaming industry. That's a question that all of us get asked a lot. But before we do that, we usually have a little game to play. Mike, take us on.
Yeah, play, hate, or miss. And so for me, playing, it's actually been a little bit of a slow week. I've been spending a lot of time outside, not as much gaming, and I've actually gone back to a series that is near and dear to our hearts, courtesy of my son who came over and we hung out. Destiny 2.
Oh.
So I've picked that up a little bit of late. Hating on. I've also picked up a couple new hobbies. Tennis, which I have never played, which is always a sight to see. And then I've been in and out of the gym trying to get back into. And I'll say that the thing I'm hating most, and it cuts across both those things, grunters. And what I mean by that, I don't get it. Grunters. I'm just like, what is this whole thing? I don't understand it. How is it that in tennis you have to grunt every time you hit the ball?
Yes.
And when you're working out, no matter what happens, you're just like, if you're lifting, and it's always predominantly men, right?
Yeah.
But it's like there's some noise, some that has to come out of you. I don't get it. I hate it. It makes me feel awkward. I'm just like, what do I do? If they're grunting, do I grunt? No, I don't. Anyway, so I'm hating on that, if nothing else, because I just feel awkward. And then missing something that is, I miss gaming nights. I think part of that was when I moved to Sweden. I moved off of platforms from Xbox, predominantly PS4. I lost a lot of those old, those folks that I used to play with, and that was a big part of what gaming was for me. It was social, and so I'm missing that rhythm. I'm missing the gaming night. So play, hate, and miss for me. Paul, what do you think?
All right. So something that came out for free on the Epic Game Store, I want to say 2 weeks back or so, that I grabbed because I love tactical turn-based RPGs. And this one is called Pathway. So you're basically a bunch of adventurers fighting off some Nazis as you work your way through a map, and you have a tactical top-down combat, grid-based. That's pretty good. I haven't played it for too long, maybe a couple hours, but I'm enjoying it. What am I hating on? I'm hating the fact that there was a thunderstorm in Stockholm last night, and apparently so many people were ranting and raving about it this morning. It woke them up. It was so loud. It was so good. Blah, blah, blah. I slept through it, and I love thunderstorms, so I'm upset if it was that good that I missed it. So,
FOMO.
And then what am I missing? I'm missing traveling. Like we're not going anywhere this year, which sucks. Ever since I moved to Europe, I try to travel somewhere nearby, just because it's really cheap. It's like going to another state, like when I was back home. But it's I just miss being able to go see other places. That's me. Right. Hans, how about yourself?
Okay, well, I've been playing a lot of free-to-play games this week. I'm playing still in Path of Exile and still in Dota, and free to play. They're still getting my money, so I don't know what that's about. But I'm hating on these long ass games, and there's a bit of a debate right now as to whether Last of Us 2 is too long. They spent an entire console generation making that game, which is a really risky move. It's like 6 years, almost 6 years. And Last of Us 1 was originally released on the PS3. And I'm not going to ever play that game because it's just too long. I'm never going to be able to give that game the time it needs to sort of get into, because I need to play one first, right? So, no, hating on that. And I'm missing, and it's going to be another one of those COVID pandemic missings. Like, I miss the city because I live outside of the city. I live in the suburbs, an hour outside of the city during rush hour. And it's nice to just have lunch at work in the city, especially during the summer times. So corny, but that's my list.
So give it props to Hans for finding a way to hate something that's good.
Oh yeah, well, it could have been more condensed, maybe.
I like it. All right, so let's get into the topic. So I think at the start, Hans, you said, hey, look, we want one of the most often asked questions I think all of us have been faced with or been part of that discussion, which is, how do I even get into gaming? How did you guys get into gaming? And I think we wanted to spend some extra time today and really change up the format. Historically, we take a position, we talk about different sides, but this was such a meaty topic. We really wanted to kind of dig in and I think just answer or at least talk about two different things. And one is, How do you get into the gaming industry, and even talk about our own paths into the gaming industry and what that journey looks like. And we also want to talk about working in the gaming industry for you. There's a lot of great things that we love about the gaming industry, but we also want to tell the complete picture of what it means to be in the gaming industry. So those are the two kind of areas that we'll talk about. My hope is that everyone will leave that conversation with a good handle on, what is it like to work in the gaming industry. So with that in mind, why don't we just talk about our journeys first? And Hans or Paul, why don't you just talk about how did you even get into the gaming industry? Where did it all start? And walk us through that path.
Well, mine's real quick because I haven't really been part of this for very long. So my current position is head of code, which is a wonderfully pretentious title. I came, that was my own design, maybe. I work at a game studio called Fat Shark, and we're mostly known for our Vermintide games. And I've been there for a little more than 2 years. And I have a couple of decades of programming experience under my belt. And I've been working a lot in mobile apps and web apps, doing both development and management. But I was really keen on getting into the games industry as, a kid just growing up playing games. And then as a teenager, playing games. And then as a young adult going through college playing games. And then I had a lot of friends just get chewed up by the industry, This was sort of early to mid 2000s. A lot of game studios had a lot of crunch and overtime and stressful working conditions, and I saw friends of mine just get really they hit a wall, and I felt like I don't want to get into that, especially if I'm not as my first job. I have no sort of leeway, no sort of bargaining power, so I kind of went a different route. So I went, into finance and programming and that kind of stuff. But a few years ago, friends of mine kind of pulled me into this industry, mostly to do management, which I've been doing for a couple of years now. But yeah, that's my path in to this one.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and you touched on a couple of areas that I think we'll dig in a little bit more. But it's always interesting to see, and I think you'll see we have very different paths. But Paul, go
for it, Mike. You're go for
it. This is the beauty of what I thought was I was going to be moderating. No, maybe not. So let me. Mine starts a little while ago. It's interesting. I went to school. I was always. I think it starts with most of us. Probably starts with we had that passion first, right? We were gamers at heart. In college, I was a gamer. Even before that, I was a gamer. And in college, I was actually more technical. I was an engineer, computer science major, and I thought I wanted to make games. It just so happened, though, that I had my career kind of took a different path. I went into more kind of a sales and marketing field. And then I got an opportunity to come work at Microsoft. And a few years in, I was on the enterprise side at the time. I had an opportunity. I really wanted to look at, how do I get into game development? And one of the easiest paths at that point, because I had no game development experience or anything like that, was testing. And that was my first almost, let's call it, moment into game development. And I still remember the interview to this day where I'm sitting there at the table, and it's an informal interview. So it's at Microsoft. It was more about establishing your network or building your network. And midway, or at least maybe at the end of the interview, let's call it the informal discussion, I said, I really want to do testing, and I had no idea what testing was at the time, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, kind of did, kind of didn't. And there was this hole in the middle of the table, and it had a plastic ring in it. And he looks at that, and I think that's where you put flowers or something else. And he pulls it out of the table, and he gives it to me, and he says, "Great, go test that." It was just I remember going. So needless to say, that kind of put, because I was like, I just got locked up. But that kind of put the brakes on maybe I don't know what gaming is. Yeah. And so that was very early, let's call it in my 20s. And then I found a different path into, let's call it communications, international communications, that actually was in the Xbox group when Xbox had just come onto the scene. And so that was my first opportunity, but through a communications route to really kind of work into it. And it was a hybrid role. It was kind of a product role / communications. And the truth of the matter is somebody just took a chance on me. I had an interesting mix of different skills that happened to fit the role, even if it wasn't necessarily gaming. And then it just kind of grew from there. I went from there into retail and then back into the Xbox group. And then just have, over the last 15 to 18 years, I guess, I've been kind of in and through and maybe even sometimes out and back into the gaming field, everything from product marketing to global marketing to global strategy teams, and you name it, kind of everything under the belt. So, and as many times as I've tried to get out of the gaming space, I've always kind of come back to the gaming. So I clearly like it. But that was kind of my journey in and out of, and what kind of led me in. But the kind of the moment, I would say, was somebody took a chance on me. I had a certain mixture of skills and I made something of it, and I clearly liked it. So Paul, what about you?
Not too dissimilar. So lifelong gamer, always. I actually never thought that I could get a job in games. I never considered it. I think a lot of where my headspace was at was very influenced by my family, and this was like this is a new area, and they're like, you know, wasting time on games. There's nothing here. So I never considered the possibility. But when I went to college, I was like, maybe let me try programming. I'm gonna try computer science. I took one semester. I hated it. I'm like, this is the stupidest thing ever. I can't. No. Like, cool. Well, there goes that dream. I tried. Shifted. Did nothing with college. Then was chatting along with a lot of friends that I'd made via online gaming, and some of them took a chance on me, similar to like yourself, Mike. They said, you know what? They work at an agency. Their name's Ten Gun. The agency. The owners were like, your skill set and what you've done does not match up with anything that we do. But we know you. We've played games with you for a long time. We know you as a person. We feel that you'd apply yourself and you do well. So they took a chance, brought me to Seattle. I contracted out to Xbox, ended up working there for 2 years in a U.S. marketing role. That's actually where I first met Mike. If you remember way back when, Mike, it was like,
oh, I do.
That was a while ago.
Yeah.
So did that for 2 years. Followed my boss's boss to EA. She had been there previously. I really learned a lot from her. I really wanted to continue to work with her and learn from her because I thought marketing was a thing, because I was like, I have no game dev experience. She got me a job at got me a foot in the door to work at EA, which shipped me over to Stockholm. Like, that was a huge opportunity. Again, like, someone's like, you kind of can do some of the things that we need in a role. Let's see if we can make this happen. It worked out pretty well. So I moved over here, worked in a kind of a hybrid marketing community role for a couple of years. And then the dev team at DICE needed somebody to run a small little dev team of about 10, 12 people.
Oh no. Lost Paul. And welcome back, everybody. We experienced some technical difficulties. We lost Paul, but he's back now, so please continue.
Yeah, so I transitioned from the marketing team at EA into working for the dev team at DICE. And that was primarily because the work I had been doing on the marketing side was the closest thing that they had to somebody that had the knowledge set for what they were looking for on one of their dev team members. So led a small team of like 12-ish people for about 2 years. And then the third year into that, I picked up working on some of the free-to-play games that EA was still running at the time, like Battlefield Heroes, one of the Command & Conquer free-to-play games. Oh man, I'm forgetting what some of the other ones were. There was a Need for Speed free-to-play game. So I kind of like shepherded those things for about a year, a little bit. Learned a little bit about free-to-play space. That was really interesting. Ultimately, flipped back into marketing, oddly enough. Was doing marketing on the first Star Wars Battlefront. And then after doing that for about a year, flipped back to development and worked as a producer leading a team for the post-launch of Battlefront 1. And then I worked on the launch version of Battlefront 2. And then left shortly after that to join Avalanche, where I've been product owner for about the past 2 years. Where I lead a small team of about 30-ish folks on Generation Zero.
Cool. Wow. You guys seem to know what you're talking about.
I like to think I've been around the block a bit.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say to that. Here's what I think. Here's what I will say, because I think there's a lot of good war stories I think we've talked about through our different paths, both kind of mixing throughout different kind of companies, different industries, and different products we both kind of worked on. But I think here's what's interesting, because there's a couple of things as I was just hearing you guys talk. One is that both for Paulie and I think there is hey, somebody needed to give us a chance. And I think that was much more common in early days gaming, because frankly, the industry wasn't mature enough.
Yep.
It really, that's the only sources of talent you really had. And I'm talking 10, 15, 20 years ago. You still have some of that. In fact, I've hired many people that don't have gaming experience. And we will bring them in part because they have certain kind of skill sets and they are a fan. But as the industry, and in particular with marketing, where you don't have nearly as many schools that have built, or trade schools or what have you, or even colleges like USC now, which have fairly rich programs that are designed to build this muscle so that they can enter the workforce. But you do see some of that, but I think it was much more common, I think, when we were early into the industry, and now you're seeing less of that. But I think that begs the question, right, which we wanted to get into, and that is, how does one get into gaming or the gaming industry? And so I think that's a natural conversation that we'll get into the second part of this question. So Hans, you've hired people, you've worked with folks, Paulie, they often will ask you that question, which is, oh, hey, Paul, you work at Avalanche? That's so cool. You work at DICE? You work at Microsoft? I mean, these are the questions that I've historically done. Yeah. I have these skills. How do I get into gaming? So what's your answer?
Yeah, that is a tough one, because like, if you don't have an education, there are trade schools you can spend a year, at least here in Sweden, the curriculum is usually a year of courses, and then another kind of almost a year of practical experience at a company as an intern or something like that. Those are readily available, or you go to a college where you become an engineer, or go into computer science or something like that. But I would say make games. Like, there's really no excuse not to make any kind of games. We've never had it as good. There are more tools and game engines and ways to make games right now than there's ever been. Because going back not too long, you would have to license an engine, and that cost $1 million. That was the standard fee for an engine.
I wouldn't have expected that answer, but I think we'll probably have different answers, which I think is good for people. The head of code says, hey, turns out the software, the tools, everything else that's out there is so easy. Be a hobbyist first, make games. And in some ways, that actually is your conduit into gaming.
I have so many CVs passing across my desk, over here. And you need to stand out, because there are so many people just graduating from these schools. And like you said, in the last 10, 15 years, we've seen an explosion of trade schools and even college and universities with gaming curriculums. So you need to stand out, because there's going to be a lot of people kind of vying for those few spots. And there are not that many game studios. And if you want to work on a game, then especially if you want to work on sort of AAA or high end, there are maybe more, I would say, like mobile game studios that are available to apply to. But if you want to work with one of these few known franchises, maybe, then you need to have a portfolio to show, basically. And that's something I rarely see with people apply for programming jobs, especially if you're an engineer, right? You just went through 4 or 5 years of college or university, and now all of a sudden you're done, right? You wanna get a job in the industry, but then you only have, a few sample projects that maybe were sort of course projects that you did with some friends, and yeah. For me, it's always been just show me the projects of games you've done, because you probably have the time to make a couple of games.
Yeah, I think that makes sense as you start to think about your side of the business, your craft in particular.
Yes.
Paul, what are your thoughts?
I think for me, if I being a product owner, I work with so many different types of people that have so many different skill sets and do so many different different things on a game that I don't think there's any one path. It depends on what do you want to do, and more than likely, whatever it is that you like to do exists in gaming. Like there is so many people I think gravitate very much towards kind of what you were discussing, Hans, which is you need to be a programmer and work on games, go to a school for that stuff. But I think that what if you're a really good writer and you happen to love games? Like, well, guess what? You can apply. There are narrative people that that write stuff. There are people that are really good at problem solving. So, Mike, like you gave that example of QA, right? Like everyone just kind of thinks that QA is really easy to do, but I mean, if you have a really solid QA member, like Jesus, I really value those people. Like, and they're just really outside the box, just like crazy smart people. But you know, they didn't necessarily go to school for that, right? I think that there's jobs for so many different things. Like if you want to be a voice actor, you can do that in games. If you want to be an animator, if you want to be an artist, like there's just so many different opportunities. I don't think there's any one way. It's just find your passion. What do you like to do? And if you want to marry it with gaming, it's more than likely that's a way in.
I actually want to riff off of that a little bit because I think you're right. There's so many different entry points, and some of this is maybe it may or may not be exclusive to marketing because marketing doesn't really have a lot of those skills aren't focused on games marketing yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we more often, or at least I have more often looked at is while you look for a lot of that game experience, there are certain fundamentals of marketing that we are looking more for, right? Whether it's kind of product marketing, whether it's kind of digital marketing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole myriad of different kind of disciplines of marketing that you may look in, which is your conduit or kind of your entry point into marketing. But I also think that what you said, Hans, is really important, which is how do you stand out, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, whether it's creating your own portfolio or in the case of other jobs, it's sometimes just being able to network and not unlike many other jobs, right? You need to be able to know somebody and to be able to have those relationships so you can be noticed. And that is and can be, you know, an opportunity for you to get into many of these companies. I also would say a couple other things, just, you know, having both kind of seen this, hired this, and then kind of observed it, is there's a couple of different ways that you can get into games that are easier than others, right? I think working in a multinational company has its benefits here. I think there are many times at Microsoft working there for many years, both myself included, that you can work in other disciplines, other fields, other categories, and you can move into, because that's part of the beauty of being in a multinational company, you can move into some of those different organizations that are maybe more entertainment related. If you have the right relationships and the right skill sets, and that becomes actually pretty easy. You also, I think, can start to, you know, especially let's call it smaller developers. You know, I think it's easier to maybe move into some of the smaller developers with less gaming, maybe at more associate levels earlier in your career. It's more challenging as you get later in your career to actually get into some of those roles in gaming because you're looking for both kind of depth of experience and, you know, resident expertise within the field. So I think those are, go ahead, Paul.
No, I think the thing that you really hit on that's really important is I think even just, you know, a skill set and a background in a related field. Like I think of that as like entertainment, right? Like there are, I'm sure there are programmers that work on movies for various things that they're doing with CGI and shit. I don't know well enough, but I would assume so.
Yeah.
But I mean, like that's and then that also ties into the thing you mentioned about like if you work at large multinational or international companies, Mike, like having something where you're able to pull in a lot of knowledge and a lot of various disciplines across a huge cross function, like that kind of shapes your worldview of should all this stuff work together and how do all these pieces fit into a puzzle. And I think that some of those things combined give you just a lot of experience. So maybe necessarily you never worked in games, but you've worked at Marvel for like doing movies for like 5 years. Like that's how you stand out on a resume, right? You're like, oh, okay. They're used to the type of environment that I'm likely going to have them walk into working on a game because it's a creative entertainment based field. Large companies, this could be a large company. Like those things I think translate really well. And that's what I know when I'm looking at CVs, I look for people that have related experience in fields that matter, not just necessarily. Um, I've done marketing for 20 years selling vacuum cleaners. I'm like, well, okay, that's a lot of years of experience of marketing, but this is a different type. If they were 20 years of marketing, movies or
Pinball
like at a
machines.
blockbuster or something, I'm like,
But it's
closer,
a
closer.
good story, bro. I'm not gonna lie. I might want to interview the person that has been selling vacuums for the last 20 years and just wants to get into gaming. I'm like, just talk to me about your story. But I think there is some things to be said about that. But Hans,
It could be very difficult though to know what's a related field. If you're just starting out at anything, if you have no idea how sort of games are made, if you haven't seen, behind the scenes, and there are plenty of YouTube channels dedicated to that kind of stuff, or you could educate yourself. There's a lot of books on game development that kind of talks through the process of how you make a game. But it's a weird mix, a weird alchemy of technology and fun. Which is the entertainment industry is way closer, but it's hard to just like make something that is playable at a technical level, but is also fun. And those things are hard to teach. And most studios have their own version of how we do that. Their own processes. So it could be very hard just starting out. Say if you've been in a completely unrelated field to software development or any kind of project work. Say you've been a librarian for 20 years, but you're really into games, and you really like, this is my time. I have saved up a little bit of money. I can kind of spend some time. It's like, where do you start? And I would say you need to educate yourself on how to make games. A lot of people who apply that I see can talk at length about the games they like, which is good. You need to play games in order to understand what's good and what makes certain experiences interesting and that right. But you also need to really spend time to kind of understand the specifics of the game craft, and that's if you're a programmer, if you're a designer, level designer, or sound designer, or game designer, or artist or animator, you need to be able to show people some kind of portfolio to stand out from the crowd.
I'll be honest. Yeah, you're right about that. And it is a far more competitive field today than it ever has been. In part because it's just sexy, right? It's not like we're selling diapers or toilet paper. We're selling games, and by virtue of that, it's so much more interesting. It's part of what keeps me coming back into the industry, is that it's so dynamic, and it's not just the fact that it's entertainment. It's so dynamic as an industry, but I do, it's interesting because I think I kind of go back and forth in this. There's nothing better when you can find somebody that has all of the skills you need, has high EQ, emotional kind of intelligence, and is that perfect candidate. But rarely is that the case, right?
Yeah.
And I go back and forth as to how much I weight as a manager, as how much I weight industry experience, because I do think that we're getting to a point where you have that as the industry grows up, you want certain kind of depth and experience, and you want a different level of competency, and not just how do we get things done in the gaming business. And I feel like we have kind of grown out of that. It's not just about the intricacies, and it's falling more in line to what other industries are doing, meaning how we come to market, now it's different, right? It's more digital and many other things, but there is a lot of fundamentals that you're starting to kind of, how we sharpen up how we market, are more similar than than different today, which means that the type of profiles and the candidates that I look for are actually different. I'm less concerned about the industry experience, so long as this is the one requirement they have to have. You don't have to have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years of gaming experience, but you need to understand the industry and what it's about, which often means that you're a gamer.
Yeah.
You don't have to be, but you need to understand the industry and the dynamics if you're coming into some of our roles, at least what I hire for. Otherwise, it's just way too big of a gap. And worse than that, there's so much nuance and intricacies in this industry that you lose by not having some of that insight and that understanding.
And I think that's super challenging because this industry, more than any other, is on like the forefront of social media. Like it's so ingrained with how we make games and how that communication street is paved between your players and the people that make the games, that it just means there's so much that happens so quickly all the time that you need to at least be somewhat aware of what's happening consistently. Otherwise, you can be very tone deaf with what is currently happening. And it's to the detriment of the product you'd be working on at that time.
Yep.
Community is a good example of that, which is just, it is, I think, fundamentally different in our field. There are only, I think, really two industries where we have this linkage between community and the development of what you produce. And that's sports and gaming, I think, are the two where you have that level of fervor. In my mind, at least in how I think about it. But it's a good example of just how we come to market differently.
Yeah.
So, Mike, you had this other question for us to answer. We talked a lot about this stuff, but maybe it's even worth revisiting because I think we're going long on this stuff, and I think there's definitely more to explore. But you had another question for us.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, okay, we talk about, how do we get into the industry? But then it's like, a lot of people not having the experience of being in the industry, it always looks rosy on the outside. And it's like, everything is awesome. And the truth of the matter is, it's often that, but often it isn't. And so now the question is gaming, right for you, being in the gaming industry and working in the gaming industry? And I think this is a good exploration of like, what do we love about it? What are some of the things to expect? What have we personally maybe even had to work through, whether it's hardships or other things? And so I can kind of go first in some of this, and we can go through this. But so to me, here's what I said this earlier, but what I love about the gaming industry, and it's not just about the entertainment, and I do like that piece of it, but it's the dynamic aspect of it. It's still a hit-driven business, but not just that. It's like it's now evolving beyond just a hit-driven business, and there's new business models, and there's a whole sort, like there's competitors on any given year, month, and day that are disrupting the industry, and that's cool. It's like the best parts of tech married up with what you said, fun and art. And that's just a unique position to be in as a marketer, because you can constantly think about different ways to come to market and work with your development partners. It's both challenging in many ways because you're marketing things that are not even finished, which is majority of my job. And it's always a big kind of shock to marketers where they're like, wait a minute, the product's not done. No, we market the product before it's done. Yeah. It's okay. I got you. It's like, that's just part of kind of gaming. So that's like the good parts, right? On the tougher side is launches and the kind of highs and the lows. The highs can be really high. The lows can be really lows. And I've had my share of really, really difficult launches. I was part of the Battlefront launch. I was part of Battlefield. I've had some really tough Halo launches. And so I think, in Age of Empires, for the example, so there's been a lot of really difficult launches that, is tough as a marketing partner and going through. And I think that can be taxing. But I mean, that's at the high level, and then we'll kind of dig into some of that. But definitely the highs and lows and just the ebb and flow of the business can be really challenging. What do you guys think?
Well, it's kind of tough as well when you're constantly reading critique on your work online, right? So if you go on a forum or a subreddit and you want to see, hey, what are people saying about our latest release, and you're seeing, all these sometimes valid criticisms, sometimes people might be a little bit too harsh, right? And I've had colleagues talk to me about this where they're like, how did the launch go last week? Because I have been too afraid to read the subreddit. And I was like, man, you gotta get in there because they're loving your stuff. Or there's some maybe harsh stuff that sometimes you have to kind of sift through, and that can be really taxing. Like you're putting heart and soul into a product, and people are kind of just rejecting it. So even
it's a good point. It's a really good point that everything that you do has a double-edged sword of people see.
Oh yeah.
Everybody sees what you do, and it's on a platform for people to critique it. Yeah.
But also we need to have that kind of transparency, because like the product is going to get better by being close to the audience, and it's really cool for gamers to be able to just actually communicate with the people making the games. That is cool, and that will lead to better games as well. But it can be really tough. So yeah.
So I got some more, but I want to hear Pauly first. Go ahead.
I'm very much in. I understand where Hans is coming from. It's emotionally taxing. I think that like you said, Mike, there's a lot of great highs. I tend to be a more even keel person. So like for me, like the highs aren't necessarily like I'm losing my mind. I'm just kind of like, yeah, feels good, doing the thing, you know. And even my lows aren't super low, but I'd say that the weirdest low that I've had was actually when I first started. After when I was working at Xbox, after about a year, I'd been driving myself to do a lot of work, and I hit a point where I was working in games all day, and I was like, "This is living the dream." I'm finally doing. I'm in the games industry. Like I should be super over the moon, mega happy all the time. But I'd go home and be like, "All right, I need to unwind from work. Let's go play a game because I love games. All I do is play games." I'd go home, turn on my Xbox, turn on my PC, sit there, just be like, "I can't do this." I stopped playing games for about 6 to 9 months. So I just go home, sit there, fall asleep. Like it wasn't depression, because I've had friends that have been depressed in the game industry, but like it was just a point where I'm like, it sucked the fun out of the thing that I enjoyed most in life. And I think that that's something it's a bit of the old adage, like you learn how the sausage is made, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it taints your enjoyment of the thing once you know a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes. And that's something that I struggled with for a while. Like after I eventually started playing games, like I said, after like 6-9 months, I kind of got through it. But at a certain point in time, as I kind of like learned more and more, I started getting less like emotional about the things that I was working on, and got somewhat detached from it, so that I could still go home and enjoy that thing in a more like, again, a detached kind of sense.
Right.
So like, yeah, I work in games, but I also play games. Try not to think about the work aspect of a game when you go there. And it took a lot of like just mentally training myself to not sit there, turn on and be like, okay, but why did they do this?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't like it. Just I would sit there and just overanalyze something. I'm like, no, you're ruining it for yourself.
Yeah.
Stop this.
That actually that resonates with me too, but for a different reason. I think not just the kind of seeing the sausage being made, but more that I think when you're a marketer, you're trying to, whether it's one, two, maybe multiple products, you're trying to get really close to each one of those, and you're playing so much of those games that I think it does take the fun out of it, because you're only playing those things, and it becomes more work.
Mm-hmm.
You do lose the fun aspect. And I remember going through some of those cycles, and I think you're right. You have to get to a place where you emotionally detach some of that from what your work is and what your fun is. And you need to find the diversity in both, or at least in one of those, to be able to kind of recoup the fun. But I remember I've had those moments where I'm just like, it's almost akin in my mind to working at a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And being around that food all day long, and you're like, well, don't you? It's the best food. It's the best pizza, and you're like, dude, I'm around pizza all day long.
I just eat salami.
I'm like, that's all. I smell salami. I do. I'm like, I don't want any more. Like, no, I don't want no pizza. And I think there is something analogous to that in the gaming industry.
And I think that the other thing though is like that stage doesn't happen for some people, or not stage. I say that make it sound like everyone does it. No, but like some people just don't experience that. Like everybody has different experiences. But I think that these are the type of things that can happen. So, I've seen some people come into the gaming industry, work for a bit, and be like, well, I learned a lot, but this is just not for me.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that it's kind of getting into the different strokes for different folks area. But I think that it is something that if you're very passionate about this industry, like I'd say chances are higher that it would impact your love of doing the thing outside of working on it.
Sure.
I have one more. Go ahead.
And whenever you have passion in your work and the craft you do, it's very easy for people to take advantage of that, right? Which is another thing that I think we're getting better in the industry, but absolutely we aren't, done with this. Is that games take a long time to make, and it's very risky. You have no idea how well the game's going to fare once you launch it. It might be a whole console generation. It seems like Last of Us 2 is doing pretty well at the box office, so that was a good bet. But still,
that's not always the case. Right?
That's not always the case.
That's not always the case, and you will have spent maybe 2, 3, or in the case of Last of Us, 6 years around one particular product, waiting on one launch much.
Yep.
And it can be debilitating.
Right.
That's the losses that you can take in this industry, and you in some ways have to have a thick skin to be able to kind of work through that and move on and not take that as such criticism, or maybe take some of that and grow from it.
Sure. So you can never like uncouple business decisions and creative decisions and the sort of the game that you're making, and the games always grow. So they never get smaller than you scoped for. Never, they always grow. But you need to find a place where if you're putting a lot of time and effort in, you will be fairly rewarded, basically.
Yeah.
And
so I have one more that that has kind of driven me to this industry, or at least keeps me in, and that is being around some of the most creative people in the world. Seeing some of the pieces, whether it's environmental artists, some of the top environmental artists in the world, some of the best developers, just seeing that fusion of creativity come together and come to life in a product is unlike anything in my life. And that is amazing. And just being close to that, I think, is amazing as a marketer, just to see that come through. At the same time, one of the most challenging things that I have ever had in my role is working with creatives.
oh boy.
And as much as I love you guys and I love the development side, I really do, and I say that genuinely, it is some of the most challenging work ever, is to see people that have maybe a particular creatives that have a particular vision and that are unbendable, not breakable, unbendable, in a way that it actually may in fact make sense for the players, for marketing, whatever it is. But that is one of the biggest challenges, is working with creatives to get to a coherent vision, to be able to kind of sell our product in the end. And all of the kind of conversations that go in between.
It is definitely a double-edged sword. Like you said, there's the opportunities for like crazy amounts of learning how to solve complex problems with a team is almost unparalleled. Like, I mean, there's other like, I think any massive team-based goal thing, like NASA has some of the crazy smartest people. The entertainment industry, like movies and others, have similar. But I think that some of the things that we work on are just very complex, and they're very challenging in terms of, well, how do you solve for like 12 problems at once?
Yeah.
In this with one small aspect of a game that people might not even notice. You're like, it took the collective brain power for like a month of 10 people to figure out, like, if you add up all the time. One of the industry terms we love is the man month. But like stuff like that, like you just think about how much time and effort you have to pour into solving like small problems, and then just magnify that over the course of years. Like, Jesus, like the permutations is ridiculous.
And the exposure to millions too, on top of it. I think that, that's, I mean, here's the truth. I think we could spend hours, not minutes, on this conversation. I think this is kind of a good starter conversation for a lot of this. But I think we're also kind of getting to that point where, we've probably exhausted some of this conversation. So that's it. I guess that's it, kind of the end of the conversation.
Well, also, like, it might not be super easy to get in touch with us, but I would love to be able to hear specific questions and comments from people. Whether they want us to sort of continue this conversation in specific directions. So, comment below, or like get in touch with us. There's either our emails on our website. You can go to patchandcrash.com, and there's an email there.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to continue that discussion. So we'll see what comments. But before we kind of end it, we have That's Fucking Cool.
That's fucking cool.
So I think, in typical fashion, I'll start it off, and then hopefully one of you two has something better. Unless, Paul, do you have something?
I actually have nothing this week, so that's fucking lame.
We need to come up with that's fucking lame. I think we should do that too. Okay, I like it. I dig it. I think just you get kudos just for being able to kind of call it for what it is.
Nice.
So here's, as I'm kind of stumbling through the what's That's Fucking Cool. You guys know I love dogs. I have 2 dogs. One, in fact, is Leroy Jefferson Jenkins. I don't think there's a cooler dog name than that. And I stumbled in, I think a while ago, there was a big hoo-ha around Boston Dynamics and the robot dog. It turns out now, I didn't know this until last week, I guess they just announced, you can actually buy your own robot dog for a cool kind of $75,000 USD. And it even comes with its own SDK. You can add attachments. I mean, I could have a military robot dog. And here's the best part. I love Leroy, love you. He's over there. I hate what I hate about dogs is they're only part of your life for so long. Robot
Yeah,
dog
it sucks. Dogs suck.
in the post-apocalyptic era. Like I'm like doomsday planning my robot dog. So that's my that's fucking cool. What about you, Hans?
Oh, that one's hard to top, but I actually have a colleague of mine shared a link to see if I can do some smart kind of stuff here on the stream. So a fellow named Ibrahim Hamdi, who's a graphical artist. Here we go. So I think you guys can see this as well now, because I think this is so cool. So game logos in Arabic, which is something that people usually don't localize to Arabic in games. But this guy, he is a graphical artist, and he has sort of repurposed game logos into Arabic, and they look really, really cool.
They're pretty badass. So we're looking at, so now for listeners that are like on Spotify, because not everybody's going to be able to see this.
That's right.
Hans, where are we pointing them to? Because this is actually pretty cool.
Oh, so it's a link to his portfolio. I'm gonna put it into the show notes if I can figure out how to do that. But yeah, basically.
So they've got GTA 5 in there. Yeah. They've got Fallout. They've got what else? And it's all in. Yeah.
And it's also very so true to the original logo, where he's repurposed the
style. Yeah.
And also Arabic is right to left, so. A lot of the sort of nuances of the logo might be, you put the emphasis on the 4 over there in Far Cry 4 has a different color. And now obviously you read right to left and it's going to be a different thing to it. And there's tons of these really, really well-made logos. And I really love them.
Yeah, I think it's so well done. It's so well done. I love, when you see something super creative. Yeah, when you see something super creative, and somebody come out of there and you're like, that just, the execution was well done. So hopefully people can take a look at that is fucking cool. You get mad props for that.
Well, this guy, Ibrahim Hamdi, gets mad props for that. So yeah, that's fucking cool. So maybe that sort of concludes the show. We spent some time talking about how to get into the industry and whether the industry is right for you. And unless you guys have anything, I'm going to say stay safe out there.
I think that's fine. All right.
Cool.
See you.
Thank you all for listening. If you want to see more episodes of this podcast, please check out patchandcrash.com. Also, follow us on Twitter @patchandcrash, where we post about new episodes or live streams.